Thank you for joining us on today's Renewed Minds. This edition is brought to you by the English School, a free service to English language learners in the community. Levels of instruction include beginners, conversation, and intermediate. Classes meet on Monday and Wednesday from 9:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Contact the Church on Main at office@churchonmain.church for more details. In our podcast, we'll be discussing challenges and opportunities we'll all face, no matter what season of life we're in. In each episode, we'll offer practical tips we've learned over the years and also share how love and grace can help each of us when we're trying to maintain hope. Today in the studio, we have Tonya McDearis, Senior Pastor of the Church on Main in Blacksburg, Virginia, and Tonya Dinkel, owner and coach of Life in Action. Today's specific topic is why obeying can be good. Obeying is a concept that we're taught as children. However, as adults, we can be reluctant and push back on obeying. It can be difficult to obey since we're not in charge and afraid of the unknown. So then, why is obeying a good thing?
Why is obeying a good thing? You talk to a lot of people. I mean, obedience, I would think, would come up a lot in your conversations with people.
Obedience does come up a lot. And I always drive home the point that it can be good or it can be bad. It's up to you to turn it into one or the other. That you need to spend some time looking at, is it truly beneficial to you to be obedient? I recently did some counseling with a woman who had gone through a very bad marriage. And for a very long time, she thought she was being a very good wife by just doing whatever she was told to do. It finally occurred to her when she was told to do something that was going to harm her children that it was that there was something wrong in the way she was thinking. And as it turned out, there was something wrong with the way she was thinking, and she decided to get out of that marriage and has come to a much healthier view of what it means to obey now and the way that she goes about that.
Yeah, I think whether we're talking about obey or any other social, mental, emotional interaction that we have, I find it fascinating where our lines tend to be. And we all have them, and they're all in very different spaces based on the situation, which is fascinating to me. Talking about marriage, we, in preparation for this conversation several weeks ago, actually, you and I and our producer, Steve, were having a conversation about marriage vows. And what I found fascinating, so I've been married just over 5 years, and you and Susan have been married 45 years. And Steve, you and Tish have been married
47 years.
7 years.
Mm-hmm. It's been at least 3 or 4 of the best years of our wives' lives.
Well, yes. And I'm sure Brian might say the same thing on our end. But what I found fascinating was over each of those, and certainly we don't represent the majority. Certainly there's just 3 of us, right? And 3 couples. But we did not have the words to obey in our wedding vows, but you guys didn't either.
No, we didn't either, even back in our ancient day when we got married. We did not at all.
Was there a reason? Was that an intentional? Because for us it was intentional. Was it?
It was with ours, too. Susan and I and a couple of other ministers that were friends of ours helped write the vows that we put together. I've used them predominantly ever since, and then other marriages that I've done. But that the idea that the wife is just supposed to obey the husband, and there was nothing ever healthy about that.
Yeah.
That's not the way you build a good marriage. It's not the way you build a good relationship of any kind. And so we just came to the conclusion, as a matter of fact, it never even occurred to us we should include that. Mm-hmm. After the wedding was over, I had someone come to me and say, "You didn't have love, honor, and obey." And I said, "No, we didn't." How about that?
Because we're going to love and honor.
That's right.
And partner, right?
That's right. Yeah. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Mm. And I see Steve nodding. Were your all's conversation kind of the same?
Very, very similar. Yeah. My wife just looked at me and got to that point and says, "We're not going to put that in there, period."
I said exactly the same thing, that we're not doing this. And we did. We found something else. We wrote our own and did something different. Actually, I think Brian wrote most of ours.
I had a couple call me once, and they were heading toward their wedding. They'd been doing pre-marriage counseling, and the pastor told them, "If you're going to do a wedding with me, you're going to include that in your wedding vows." So they called me and said, "Would you do our wedding for us?" I said, yes, let's talk about all of this.
All right. So obey certainly has some connotations. And from my perspective, and probably I think for your alls, or maybe for your wives, there's certainly, when you start talking about women obeying men, wives obeying husbands, there is definitely a connotation there that has been pushed as being a very negative thing for several decades. And, there's a lot of discussion and argument on both sides of that, and we don't need to get into all of that today. I think probably we're all aligned on equality, and there really shouldn't be one person bowing to or being expected to obey another, especially in a partnership like a marriage. But let's just kind of start with the definition of obedience. So I think, just generally speaking, when we think about children are supposed to obey their parents, which is generally understood to be mom or dad says this, child basically says okay, right? And we all know that's ideal until they start talking. And then they start having opinions, and then there gets to be some fun dialogue.
That's exactly right. There certainly was in my house anyway.
Exactly. But what are some other definitions of obedience, Tommy, that you have leaned into or counseled through over the years?
Well, certainly that sense of try to obey the things that are right to do in life, and you have to have a foundation for that. In my opinion, there's this sense of the Ten Commandments. You're supposed to obey the Ten Commandments. I think the Ten Commandments, they're very important for us to obey. I've got a little better one, and that's when Jesus said, baptize all the world and then teach them to obey everything that I have taught you. Well, what Jesus was always teaching people to do was treat people respectfully, love one another, care about your fellow human beings, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and make a difference with people that are out there. The rule of the law code that he was following was the rule of love, and so if you apply that and then try to treat other people that way, there's something very helpful in obeying that kind of directive.
Sure.
There's nothing particularly helpful about obeying, when it's an authority figure and they're just telling you what to do and how to do it. We have all seen how well that worked out in Nazi Germany from the 1930s through the 40s. It can lead to horrible and horrific things. And the sad part is you don't have to go to Nazi Germany. Just think about how the Americans treated African Americans for so long, 300 years of brutality that went on there. And yet it's the society it was the way things were done. You were supposed to do it that way, and it was horrendous.
Well, and it still happens. It happens in a lot of different contexts in homes, in relationships, and this can go either way. It is not always, the male that is domineering over the female. Sometimes it's reversed. Sometimes it is male to male, female to female. It just depends. Sometimes it's child to parent. Like, there are a lot of interesting dynamics that can be playing out where people are trying to domineer a situation, or because it aligns with their own thought processes, beliefs, and they're wanting people to conform, which is what we talk about on this podcast, is how to not conform to everyone else's thoughts and opinions.
I raised children that found that nonconformity worked out real well for them.
I'm sure.
I raised good kids, and I really loved them very much. But I did not raise children that just did whatever they were told without having an argument about it if they didn't agree with it.
Yeah.
And they would question the authority. They'd push the buttons and see where it was going to take them.
Yeah, and where that plays through, I think, in a healthy way is it's not always bad to question authority and to push back. And we'll go to Nazi Germany as a great example. There have been studies that have been done about this that basically concluded that the reason that things took off the way that they did, and that massacre was as extreme as it was because people just didn't say, wait, this doesn't seem right. Everything in me says that this is wrong because it's hurting another person. but they didn't speak up and say that. So I think in a lot of contexts, speaking up and questioning the authority can be very helpful and healthful. There needs to be some situational awareness to know how and when to do that.
I mean, when you get to traffic laws, those kind of things, I've been in situations where I was with people who just thought they didn't have to obey the law.
Oh yeah, they're just suggestions,
and they're just suggestions, and they're very good suggestions that will get you a ticket if you don't follow these suggestions that are made by the traffic signs that you see all around you, or the warning things. But there's a reason for those things. If you're driving 70 in a 25, you can kill people.
Absolutely.
You can. It can harm everything that's around you.
Yep.
You don't obey the traffic signals that are out there. You'll run into the cars that are there. You can kill people there too.
Right.
Some laws are very important, but you need I think you need some kind of a moral foundation to base all of that on. When you get past traffic laws or when to cross the street, you really need to be thinking about, okay, is this the moral right thing to do or not? Having African American people step off the sidewalk so white people could walk down the street, you can look at it any way you want to. You can't make that okay. No. But people did it. Went right along with it, didn't think anything. And I mean, didn't think anything about it. And even when the civil rights movement started, they saw the people leading it as troublemakers, because everything was fine as far as they were concerned. My life was great.
Right.
Well, that's wonderful if you're not black and can't eat in a restaurant, can't go to the bathroom, can't get something to drink.
Right.
I can get off on this just in case you
just
can't
a little
tell.
bit.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start talking about how and where obedience can be good and can be healthy. So we know that there are some psychological benefits to obeying. That can include having reduced anxiety because kind of what something is supposed to be. What the law is supposed to be. What a program is supposed to be. What an environment is supposed to be. Kind of following the natural dynamics of that and aligning with those ideals or obeying can reduce the anxiety that you have walking into a situation because you know what to expect.
And I think about that with children. I was joking about my children a few minutes ago, but children quite often, they function best when they know what the rules are.
Absolutely.
And how they need to be behaving in a certain situation.
And that includes structure.
Yeah.
Just basic structure, whether that is a routine schedule or even if the schedule's not routine, sitting down and going through, okay, here's what's going to happen tomorrow. Or, my sister tells me, and it's actually become a joke with me and all the littles in my family, whether it's cousins, nephew, whatever the case may be. If we're going somewhere before we leave, I say, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is where we're going to go. This is what we're going to do. And this is how I expect you to behave. Mm-hmm. And then before we go into each of those, what is it again? This is what we're going to do. This is, what we're here for and how I expect you to behave. They need that.
And they want that. They don't
do.
Always know how to articulate that.
That's true.
So sometimes it comes out, it appears negative because they don't know what the rules are. They don't know. And so you give them clear structure of what they should and shouldn't be doing, and you do that ahead of time. Yep. And you'll get a kid every once in a while that is rebellious and they just want to test the waters, that kind of thing. That comes naturally with kids. But usually, if they understand this is what we need to do and here's why we need to do it.
Yep.
And often, if I could explain the why piece, I had a lot less trouble than I did
absolutely.
Otherwise. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And I would think to some degree that's true with adults, too.
I was just going to say, I think that's 110% true with adults. And in my daily practice with people, one of the things we talk about is understanding the why, whether that is your personal why, the why of a situation, the why of a necessary step, and structure holds true for adults as well. The more structure we have, the more that we understand what we can expect, it does reduce our stress overall. And then that also frees up our mental space, our cognitive load, to be able to process other things that are also healthy. Because we're not having to anticipate, we're not having to think about it. It's already, we know what it is.
Well, that sense of trust has to be there. And
Absolutely.
you get there by you all agree on a framework as you're going in. We're that way at the church here. There's a framework that we follow here at the church, even if everybody doesn't always see it. And after being here 27 years, I think people kind of know it by osmosis sometimes, is this church is pretty well known for the way it loves people and the way it takes care of them and the way the door's open to anybody to come in this place and be here and be part of the family. You can't just come in and disrupt the family. We've had that happen a couple of times where one particular Sunday, I remember like it was yesterday, when a man came in with earphones on and a helmet and goggles and started chanting about killing people and had on his fingers written Pete kills.
Oh, wow.
And, when that kind of thing happens, that's a bit disruptive.
Just a bit.
Especially when you're trying to preach.
Yes.
It tends to get on your nerves just a little bit.
I would imagine you're
everybody kind of responded to that, and we got the help we needed. And the guy was mentally ill. He needed help. We got him help. Once he got the help he needed and realized what he had done, he was very embarrassed about it. But the reality is he was also dangerous. And so you had to take seriously. But that's where the trust level came through, is when on that day when I just looked and gave a signal to people in the church, they knew there were certain things that had to happen then to make this come under control. One was call the police. One was go secure our nurseries, make sure that the trust level was there. They didn't need another dozen explanations to go with that.
Right. And that should happen. It happens at home. Kids look to parents when they're uncertain. I think we've all seen that look from a child, whether we're their parent or not. If they are not sure what's happening or what they should do, there is a very distinct look. As adults, we do that as well if we are looking for guidance, and we are always looking to someone that we visually know that is a face that I know I can trust. So let's talk about what obedience actually can look like in a healthy way. So most of us have some sort of workplace that we go to. Some people that is at home. Some people it is an office. Some people it's a job site. Some people it's their car. Some people it's other people's work sites, depending on where they go, right? Some it's a church, and you get to go spend time in a sanctuary. So the space that people work in can all look very different. But there are still policies, there are still rules that we need to obey in those spaces so that we can make sure that we are functioning optimally. And we need to understand what those are. So making sure you talked about, people knew the framework. What is a way that you've helped people understand how they can start, if they're in those positions where they can create that or even help support that? What are some things that you've told people they can do to create those?
One thing that we do as a staff, I won't say that we look at it every day, but there's an operations manual that's here at the church that has a framework around how we generally get things done. And that operations manual has largely grown out of the way we got things done and trying to follow those policies. So look for the written rules and see why they're there and what they are. I try to promote that among the people. It's a church. We all know that I work in a church. I lead a church. So one of the written and unwritten rules that I ask every staff member to go by is, what would Jesus do? Let's start with that, and let's try to work out from there. But that's not the only way. I'm the chaplain of 2 police departments, and both of those police departments are nationally accredited. Average person on the street doesn't know what that means, but it's a big deal. It takes a lot of work. But there's a very large manual that those officers are to be acquainted with. And former chief used to point out the blue pages of this manual are the things that can get you fired. They can even go beyond that and get you arrested if you violate these. Make sure you're well acquainted with the blue pages, because those are non-negotiables. Yeah. There are things in here that we can argue about, or we can get in a certain situation, we have to do something different, but the blue pages are the things that you have to look at and take seriously.
And I would imagine the content of those blue pages were primarily things that kept the community safe and kept the officer safe.
Absolutely. Every one of those blue pages was designed to do exactly that.
Yeah.
These are the things you do in these given situations, and if you do these, you are more likely to be able to walk away safe, and the person you're dealing with is the same.
Yeah.
And there's certain structures. If you have to seize money, there's certain ways you have to handle that. And do not do this differently. If you do it differently, it can come back and bite you. There's just some things that you need those kind of rules around to make sure that you function properly.
Yeah, and in most companies, and I've seen this through the years of my practice, there are generally manuals. You talked about an operations manual. Sometimes they're called handbooks or policies and procedures. There's several different names that could be tied to them, but they all have this general outline of here's how things are done in this organization, and hopefully there is a statement, at least, if not, a couple of paragraphs about here's why we're here, here's how this is important, and here's the general how we behave type of thing, and those generally would be your vision, mission, value statements, right? But the one thing that people tend to, in my experience, forget over time is this is a great document, it's a great resource, but it may need to change over time. And this is where we were talking earlier about questioning things. And sometimes that's questioning authority, sometimes it's questioning the way that we've always done it. One of the phrases, I actually just heard it in a conversation today where I was told, this is just the way it's always been, and we've tried to fight it, but it's just, we've always lost. And people have lost their jobs because they pushed back. And to my absolute core, I struggle with that. First of all, people shouldn't lose their jobs because they appropriately push back on things.
Yeah,
that's just, that should never happen. That should never be a fear that anyone has to work through. But beyond that, we are not going to get better as a business, as a church, as a society, as people, if we do not question the way that we've always done things. We take new information into account, and we make different decisions going forward.
And try to make those decisions to where they work to the benefit of everyone.
Correct.
To try to see how this will affect your employees, how it will
Exactly.
affect your clients that you are working with, how will it affect you in dealing with these
Exactly.
people. I mean, there's nothing in the world I hate more than having to deal with personnel issues that I wish we didn't have to deal with.
Right. Me too, by the way.
That just creates all kinds of stress, both for the employee. And fortunately, in my world, we don't have to do that very often, but occasionally we do.
Yeah. Yeah, I generally say it's energy that could be such better spent elsewhere. You know what the rules are. You know what rules you absolutely have to obey. And even in my world, some of those, you talked about the police officers, some of them have bigger consequences than just employment. There could be personal liability. I was looking at some I was doing an assessment the other day, and one of the things we were looking at was compliance. If you were out of compliance in any of these areas, what are the implications of that? Well, certainly fines. We're talking about federal and state compliance. But in some of them, there's even jail time. And I was like, wow, I had forgotten. Like, it'd been a while since I'd looked at it. I forgot. I could personally go to jail if I make the wrong decision.
Yeah.
Right? That's why it's important to obey.
Law enforcement is one of those key areas.
Yes.
You make the wrong decision, and it can cost you dearly.
Absolutely.
But sometimes you have people that intentionally decide to disobey without having a real idea emotionally of what they're doing. And I'll give an example. Those of us in the ministry call it ministerial suicide. There's a pastor will either consciously or subconsciously think, I don't like doing this anymore. I'm not enjoying this. I think I want to do something else. But they can't bring themselves to step away from it. They've made a commitment. They made a commitment to the church, to God, to everything else. This is not something I can do, but they can't bring themselves to walk away from it. They will very intentionally disobey a rule that they know will get them fired. or that they know will get them out, because that's the only way that they can that they can get out of their career and feel okay about it.
Yeah.
Well, they fired me. I got out of this. Well, they fired you because you had an affair, you fool.
Yeah.
That generally will get you in trouble if you're in the ministry. You know, you embezzle money from the church. You can't do that and be in our job.
Right.
I've known a couple of people in other businesses, that kind of thing. They could not bring themselves to just say, I don't want to be doing this anymore.
Yeah.
So they did something that they knew they just couldn't stay there if they did it. Sometimes disobeying has a deeper connotation than what we think it may think it does.
Yeah, no, I agree. And this could be a whole episode of its own, right? And it may be in the future. But if, for anyone listening, if you find yourself, if this is resonating with you in any way, whether you're in the ministry or you are in any type of work or even a volunteer organization, if you are donating your time, as someone recently said to me, I don't work for money, but they still work. They just don't get monetarily paid for that. Whatever your situation is, if you are not satisfied and being fulfilled and feel that you are living out your calling, there is always a way to leave and do it appropriately. And in the absence of having another podcast that we could refer people to, I will just say, if you find yourself in that position and need some coaching on that, send us an email. We'll have that at the end of the show. And Tommy or either one would be happy to talk to folks about how to make that transition.
No problem talking about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's much better to talk to some of us or to someone and make a good decision and a healthy decision than it is to make a really bad decision that may follow you for years.
Which tends to be
forever.
an emotional decision, right? When those decisions are made, the emotions tend to be running high, and the self-talk in those moments is, there is no other option. I can't see anything else that could possibly work. This is all I can do. And then victim mentality sets in, and the wheels are set in motion, unfortunately. Right. So, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about some of the social pieces. So socially accepted behaviors can often prevent chaos and can help us smooth some of the waters. So some people struggle with socially accepted norms, regardless of what they are. It's just the fact that this is what society says is okay. And again, I'll go back to, sometimes we still have to question that appropriately. Yeah. Right? But understanding, how to play in the societal sandbox is an important skill. Give
an example. What can you come up with one off the top of your head?
Give an example. So I think when,
yeah, I understand. It's I've just put her on the spot, just in case anybody hadn't picked up.
We're going to cut this part out. That's going to be so. The traffic laws that you talked about earlier would be right a socially acceptable norm. Cues from other people. If you find yourself in a conversation where someone is talking about they're in an abusive relationship. You might have a personal opinion about that. If you know both people, you might have a very passionate personal opinion about that may or may not be accurate, by the way, because again, emotion can fuel those. So what is your response? I think the accepted norm is if a wife comes to you and says, I am in an abusive relationship, then the answer should be, well, then we need to address this and get you to a safe space, right? And you may need to leave your husband. Just really making it short, right?
I've had that happen, and strangely enough, on both sides of the coin. I've had both men and women come to me, and it was obvious that there was abuse situations going on. And in one of those, it was extending to the children as well.
Sure.
I said, It's one thing for you to figure out if you want to live with abuse or not. It's a whole different thing figuring out whether your children are going to. The answer to that is never.
Yeah.
So you need to get out of this.
Well, and you've got to remember, too, the way that it presents to you may not actually be what's happening. So it is entirely possible that the wife that is coming to you and saying, I'm in an abusive relationship, is actually the one creating the abuse in this situation, right? So you want to be really careful about picking up on social cues, taking information that you know to be true, and also not acting with emotion. Asking appropriate questions. And again, you and I can help people with figuring out what those questions are, because every situation is going to be a little different. Mental health counselors are also a fantastic resource to tap into, to talk through all of the dynamics of these situations.
And you desperately need to utilize that.
Absolutely.
You need to go to it.
Absolutely.
Our study sheets that we do for these things here, it has cues. It's another one of those strange things. Cues can have more than one meaning in that. But strangely for me, I started thinking about standing in line. One of the biggest fights I ever saw was someone who just simply, not physical fights, but arguments, was someone who didn't want to wait in the line. And they didn't think they ought to have to wait in the line. And so they decided they were going to go up and get in the line somewhere else and their line was, I'm in a hurry. Well, everybody else said, we're in a hurry too. And so it finally reached the stage to where a very large man walked up and said, step out of the line or I'll help you. And so they decided the end of the line looked really good to them that day. And that they probably needed, there was perspective to that.
Yeah.
It can lead to those kind of things. It can lead to things that can start getting out of hand. There's a reason why you have a line.
Yeah.
And people you need to obey that rule of thought unless there's something that really is happening that you need to explain to people and make them understand so you can get to the front of the line. Otherwise, wait your turn.
Yeah.
That's how you keep from having chaos,
right.
Is waiting your turn.
Right. Being kind, considerate, patient, all of the
and love one another as I have loved you. That's it's one of those lines that we use a lot in my world.
Yeah. So, and then personal boundaries also come into play. You've got to determine what your own personal boundaries are, what you're willing to accept and what you're not. You talked earlier about couples that come in and you're saying, well, what you're willing to put up with is one thing, but how far are you willing to let this go? Are you willing to let it impact your kids? And that's a really powerful question when you start talking to parents in a dynamic and what the impact is going to be. And you see it probably more on the marriage side than I see, because I'm very clear. I don't do marriage counseling, but I do talk a lot with folks about their interpersonal relationships and how work and money specifically come into those arenas. And when you start talking about those pieces, there can be some divisiveness within relationships because of different opinions. And to what point do you let that go, and where is that proverbial line for you on what you're willing to spend? I was just talking to my sister today, and I said, they've got those little decorative clear stones that you can use in, decorations around the house, right? And back years ago, you used to put them in the bottom of a vase, and then you'd stick a candle on top or something, right? And just kind of balance out the bottom. And I said, I know I have some of these. I have a set of clear ones and I have a set of this blue-green. They are somewhere downstairs in my basement and I cannot find them. And I want them because I want to level out this candle in this vase that is sitting on my dining room table. And she says, Tonya, you can go to Dollar Tree and get them for $1.25. And I said, yes, I do, but I have them downstairs already. And I don't want to go do that. I did that with hot glue gun sticks before, where I couldn't find them, and then I go buy some, and then here's the rest of them. So now I've got all these hot glue gun sticks.
If you need to hot glue something,
I'm your girl. I'm your girl, but I don't have the stones to be able to decorate with the candles today. So, but that is such a silly example, but we all have a place where we draw a line in any situation. Apparently that's mine. But we need to know what that line is. And I will tell you, for me, it doesn't matter how serious or light the topic is. When I know that I have reached that line, I very clearly in my soul know that I have reached that line. Do you see that with yourself too?
Absolutely. Those hard and fast rule lines. One of mine is I don't meet with young women by myself, and you're too vulnerable to being criticized or those kind of things. I had a young woman once who said, I don't get off until late. I can meet at 8:00 anytime you want to. I said, no, I don't meet at the church. I don't meet with anybody that late, particularly someone of the opposite sex. I said, I only meet where we can go to a place where we can be seen, or there's someone else in the building. And I said, it's just a hard and fast rule for me that I won't violate that. If you're in a situation where you feel like you're going to jump off a bridge, I'll be there for you. I'm probably going to bring somebody else with me, so you need to understand that.
Right.
Too many ministers have got themselves in big trouble by very innocently not following a very obvious rule that you ought to be following, that you can support you. There has to be those boundaries that you know where they are, and you're not willing to break those. You're not willing to cross the line. I'm not going to go to any young woman's house and counsel with her. That's not going to happen.
Right.
Now I'll go to a husband and wife that's going to be there, but I'm not going to do that one-on-one.
Yeah. So you're just for clarity, the values, the boundaries that we're talking about, personal boundaries, really need to align with your personal values.
Oh, absolutely.
And in order to be able to set your boundaries and stick to them, you've got to be able to acknowledge what your values are, and they are what they are. It's okay. Like, there's not, this can't be a value for you, or this should be a value for you, or this is my value, so this should be your value. These are yours. They belong to you specifically. But you need to acknowledge those, and you need to embrace those, and then use those to help determine what your parameters are going to be, and then know that could change over time. So the rule, the hard and fast rule that you have, Tommy, which I think is a fantastic rule, and if my work wasn't virtual, I probably would have the same rule about working with a man, just the two of us in a coaching. I just don't know that would make sense. But has that always been a rule for you, or did it evolve? Not that you necessarily were in a precarious situation, but did that rule evolve over time with just things that you've seen, heard, learned from others?
I had good mentors when I started out, and some of those mentors made it very clear you need to have some very hard and fast rules about how you're going to deal with this, because this can get you in a bad situation. Only one time did I find myself getting in that bad situation, and I went by a house to pick up something that I'd been called to say it was going to be there. And I thought the rest of the family was there. When I got there, the rest of the family wasn't there. And this young woman, who was a very sweet person, seemed to be wanting me to come inside. And I realized, oh, goodness, I should have asked some more questions here. And so I got out very quickly and made sure, and it didn't. Nothing happened with that. I realized when I thought back, that John Allen and Bob Maddox were a lot smarter people than I thought they were when I was 19. And they warned me about this. Don't get in this situation, but where you have to extract yourself quickly.
Yeah.
Or things could not go well.
Right.
So.
Right. And in those situations, extracting yourself is always a good, safe option.
It is a very good and safe option that you need to think ahead how you will do.
Yeah.
Because sooner or later, you will find yourself in a situation that you didn't expect to be in. How are you going to extract yourself from that?
Yeah, if you want to kind of put your head around what that might look like, that would be, in this day and time, as sad as it is, we have active shooter trainings. We've had fire drill trainings for ages. Some areas of our country have tornado and evacuate or tornado.
I grew up in one of those areas.
Yeah. So, the reality is the more we practice something, the better we are at it. 7 times of doing something makes it a habit. The more you do it, the repetition helps. Thinking through what an exit strategy would be, I think, again, unfortunately, a lot of people these days, I walk into a restaurant a lot of times and I'm looking around going, okay, what if, where would I go? Like, how would I get out? Sometimes I remember walking into a Costco years ago, and there was something odd as I was walking through the pharmacy department that just seemed off about a group of people that were walking past me. And all of a sudden, all of the alerts were up, and I am looking around going, okay, how can I get out if chaos erupts? It did not. praise the Lord. But I had literally thought about, okay, well, in this store, there has to be a back room that leads to a dock that would lead to the parking lot. Like, here's how I can get out. Front door may not be out. Like, literally thinking through those things. So a different spin on, but the same idea of an exit strategy. Think about, what are your hard and fasts? And if you're in a position that violates one of those, how do you extract yourself and plan for that? So let's talk about when it is okay not to obey, because there are some of those situations too, right? So we started off today talking about the Holocaust, and those were people who just blindly went with what an authority figure told them to do. And same thing with the civil rights movements. Like, the history there was, it's always been this way. I don't see an issue. My dad didn't have an issue with it. Why would I have an issue with it, right? So when those perceived positions of authority have deemed this to be appropriate, we tend to just think, this is the way it's always been. This must be okay. But that's not true.
Well, of course it's not true. It's, I just suddenly had an example pop into my head. Is in my wife's hometown, back many, many, many years ago, there was a young Jewish man who was lynched there in town because he was accused of molesting a young woman. Wow. It turned out that there was no truth to it at all, but he was still lynched. That tree was still there in that town from where that happened, and there are pictures of people standing around laughing, and they're talking, and they're having a good time with this person in the background. It was just, for some reason it seemed normal to them that this was the way you would do this. This is what you were. And that to me is just so absurd and so outside of any norm that you could come up with. And it doesn't have to be that big. I won't go into the exact details of this, but when I was young, I was working for someone who told me that I needed to do something that I just knew in my heart was the wrong thing to do. And so I just said, no, I can't do that. And they got very angry, and I talked to them at length about it and just told them why I wouldn't do it. And I don't know exactly what made my boss back down from that, but he did. He realized that I wasn't going to do it, and it was based on a moral code that I held, and so I wasn't going to do that. Yeah. Which leads me to something I think is very important in this is, what are your absolutes? What do you base your life on? What are your, whether you're religious or whether you're not, what are your moral absolutes that you just can't violate and you won't do that? Or will you? You may have those moral absolutes, but when the chips are down, are you going to do it? Nazi Germany was a very good example of people. There were people who knew what they were doing was wrong, but they were afraid. I'm going to be shot if I don't do this, so I'm going to go, well, okay, is that your guideline or not? What is your morality based on, and is it something that you're not willing to give up?
Right. The mirror test is usually what I call that, right? Can I look at myself in the mirror at the end of the day? Can I lay my head down at night and go to sleep with a clear conscience that I have done everything I could do to make my life, my family, our world, the world, whatever the case may be, a better place? And am I good with the decisions that I made and the things that I said today? And if I'm not, then there's work to do, right?
And see, the mirror test works extremely well if you know what your absolutes are. If you know, we work from that mirror test because we know what our foundations are. But, what about people who don't hold that same? They seem to be able to go home and look in the mirror, and they just treated their employees like dirt or sold them out. I know I know a situation where a man just decided that he wanted to buy a farm, so he took the money he had contributed for his employees' retirement, and he bought it.
Wow.
and oddly enough, back then that wasn't illegal in that state. And he never flinched. It was just perfectly okay for him to do that. Yeah. What are your moral? If you have a set of moral absolutes, you're going to look in the mirror and ask yourself, have I done this? But you've got to have those, and it's got to be something that you'll stand by. Because if you don't have a conscience, or your moral absolutes are sort of wishy-washy, you may end up in a place that you might not have thought you would end up in, but you did, and it does. And the really scary part is it doesn't bother you.
Yeah, that is scary.
Yeah,
that is scary for sure.
It didn't. For sure. It didn't bother the Nazi Germans.
Yeah,
these people were subhuman. We can treat them any way that we want to. Well, how did you come to that conclusion?
Yeah. Yeah. So we've got to remember through all of this that discerning when to follow and how to follow based on our own moral compass is going to be a critical piece to all of this. Because depending on the situation, which we're not going to know until we're in the middle of it, what the variables are going to be. Is it, do I obey? Do I not obey? And then, like you just said, the moral compass is going to have to direct all of that. So, all right, so let's kind of wrap this up for folks and bring all of this good dialogue to a nice, clean conclusion. So some things that we have identified or we've kind of summarized today is obeying can offer psychological comfort, it can reduce decision fatigue, and it can strengthen communities.
It absolutely can do all of those things. It does keep down chaos when you are trying to work on those from those points of view. It does keep down a sense of the people around you not knowing what they really should be doing or shouldn't be doing and how they should be doing it. Obedience can work very well for a society as long as the basis of that obedience is as long as it's based on something that's truly important and worthwhile.
Right. And along with that, it can make us safer, the laws that we've talked about. But we have to follow those, and we have to make sure that we are questioning the right laws at the right time. And then also recognizing that not all obedience is good, and really developing that critical thinking muscle to think through and apply our moral compass to the situation to say, is this the right situation? And some of the questions that you might find yourself asking in this are there legal consequences to what I'm looking at or what I'm being asked to do, right? I mean, could this result in jail time or fines for me personally? Could it result in that for the organization that I'm associated with? And, then again, we talked about the mirror test. We talked about the moral compass as well. Those are some good pieces.
And what price are you willing to pay to try to do the right thing?
Yeah.
Because I increasingly fear that America's on the edge of being in a place where we're going to have to make decisions of are we doing the right thing or the wrong things that are out there, and what price are we willing to pay around that? Because sometimes being obedient is not the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And so how do we discern that? How do we look that out? Or being obedient is the right thing to do, but you're surrounded by situations that do not wish to be obedient. And how do you sort all of that out? That's why I say the moral compass, those moral absolutes, they've got to be there for obedience to work.
Yeah. So really, at the end of the day, obeying doesn't have to mean that you're giving up your independence. It can absolutely be a tool that creates a more harmonious, productive, and ethical world that we can all live in a healthy way, and we can be productive members of society together, loving and encouraging each other.
And that is kind of the bottom line of what we want the world to be. Is to be able to function in a positive way and be able to benefit everyone that is around us that we will have an effect on.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Good chat today.
So, it was a good chat.
Yeah.
I'm glad the world usually obeys me.
As usual. All right. With that, we thank you on that very positive note. We thank you for investing your time today in listening to the messages that Tommy and I have and our thoughts. We are truly grateful for you. If you found today's episode helpful, please like and subscribe to the podcast and share it with others. If you'd like to join the conversation, or if you would like to connect with Tommy or I about some of the coaching opportunities that we talked about earlier, we would love to hear from you. Just send us an email at renewedminds@churchonmain.church. We hope you make it a great day and approach every day with a renewed mind, and we will see you next week.
Take care.
Hopefully this brings a renewed perspective to the challenges and opportunities you're facing today. What steps are you going to be taking to show love and grace to everyone? If you have any questions or comments about our podcast, please send an email to renewedminds@churchonmain.church. Thanks for taking time out of your day to join us. Listen next week for the next Renewed Minds.